All right, very excited to get started with our first panel, which we are calling Regulatory Spotlight, Insights from Ireland's Data Protection Commission. And we have the perfect person here with us to discuss that, Sandra Skehan. She is the Assistant Commissioner, but also the Acting Deputy Commissioner of Ireland's Data Protection Commission. And she's worked at the DPC since 2013. The DPC is the national independent authority responsible for upholding the fundamental right of individuals in the EU to have their personal data protected. The Irish DPC is the Irish supervisory authority for matters including the GDPR. So Commissioner Skehan joins us from Ireland today. Welcome. We're really thrilled to have you with us.
Thanks a million, Bruce, for having me again.
And we have a fantastic moderator, Rohan Massey, a partner at Ropes & Gray, and a leader of the firm's data privacy and cybersecurity practice. He focuses his practice on all things cyber, including advising on complex global data protection and security compliance programs. Rohan was recently elected as the chair of the 12th annual Sedona Conference International Program on cross-border data transfers and data protection laws. He's joining us from London. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. Good to be here.
All right. Rohan, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Sandra, it is great to see you. I can't believe it's been a year since we last sat here and discussed trends, most of which was driven, I think, then by COVID in relation to sort of what had happened in cyber incidents. It's been an interesting year, for want of a better word. You know, we've had war in the Ukraine, we've had a new king in the UK, COVID has fallen to the back pages of the press. Inflation and dollar sterling conversions are back at rates we've not seen since the 1980s. A lot of things are happening. In light of the sort of geopolitical change, economic change, what trends have we been seeing with regard to cyber incident and risk?
Yep. So I suppose just to introduce us in terms of the trends that we're seeing in general, first of all, and then maybe we'll dig deeper into it. As we previously discussed, year on year, the DPC has seen a decrease in the number of notifications that are received since the introduction of the GDPR. Based of our analysis of the numbers so far this year, it's continuing the same trend. We're down about near enough to 1,000 notifications drop on last year, so that's quite significant, but it's still in line with what we've witnessed previously. In terms of the categories, then cyber incidents is still quite high on our list, but we have seen a significant drop in the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year, so that's quite an interesting figure. The unauthorized disclosure side, that still accounts for the majority of breach notifications. So that's around your email and postal material issued to incorrect recipients. Since the introduction of GDPR, that's been continuously the top category of most reported breaches to the DPC. Within the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year, though, there has been around a 35% decrease in relation to those reports. Cyber instances, we've seen a decrease in that by in and around 50%. I'll speak to you about that side further, but it is quite a significant drop, and we're analysing the reasons for that. One of the biggest increase we have seen is up nearly 60% in the first 6 months of this year has been in relation to documents that have been lost or indeed stolen. So there's quite a lot of changes within the comparison for last year and this year.
And really, I mean, I was looking at it and hearing decrease, and then suddenly the increase at the end. So there seems to be a balance sort of looking through this. But interesting, first of all, to look at the cyber incidents and the sort of the decrease there. You know, historically, as an external legal counsel, I've advised on a lot of cyber incidents, ransomware attacks, etc. And we've certainly seen a dropping off in the sort of levels of activity in that area. Interesting to hear that you're seeing the same. There's a decrease in these incidents. Do you have any thoughts as to why that may be?
Well, I suppose from engaging with our colleagues in the An Garda Síochána, which is the Irish Police Force, and our National Cyber Security Centre, there does appear to be a shift in focus from criminal organisations where they previously targeted the larger organizations, but they seem to be moving towards the smaller entities now, especially entities within Ireland. We've seen over the past couple of weeks that are connected directly to the state. So it's still quite a political statement, but they are criminal organizations that are doing this. Recently, we saw within the past 2 weeks, there was, just for an example, there was a particular attack on an engineering firm which was involved with state projects. A lot of these attacks seem to be on a flyby, where they're getting into the systems, maybe taking a look and then leaving again. So the biggest increase that we've seen in cyber incidents, which I think is in line with that analysis that the guards and the cybersecurity centre have undertaken, is in relation to the increase in the number of phishing attacks being reported. So that seems to be on the smaller entities, where people may not be as afraid with the requirements of checking links before they click on them. So we've been working with our colleagues in the consultation unit and those specifically involved with DPO networks to try and get the message out around that, and to get, I suppose, a better awareness and training of staff in relation to it. We've also seen, and we've been quite vocal on it, in relation to these companies that are buying out of the box products, security products. So not knowing that they need to maybe configure the security settings, that they're at the basic levels, and that they can introduce further analysis on it. So we do at the moment have a slight concern around the underreporting, perhaps in relation to some of those kind of attacks. So we're engaging with the guards, with the cybersecurity centre, and as well as independent law firms who might represent those companies to try and get the word out there. So we will be keeping an eye on it. We've noticed 1 or 2 complaints coming in where there's been an incident of it. So we need to analyse whether or not the companies are complying with their Article 33 obligations. So we're quite intent on pushing that side of things.
So is that a complaint about underreporting, or?
It's not a complaint about underreporting. That was a complaint about an individual who had engaged a solicitor service to purchase a house, and there was obviously the criminal organisation sitting in the background watching the interaction, and interjected when the monies had to be moved over, and a incorrect bank details were provided to the individual, and those funds were transferred then to, unbeknownst to both parties, to the criminal organisation. So it was only by our interjection with the company that they realised that there had been actually an unauthorised body sitting in the background watching what was going on in the email systems.
Interesting. I mean, it's interesting from sort of my perspective, hearing the trends, etc., seeing what's happening. They're criminals, but they run a business, right? And one of the things that, say, in my practice at least, we saw, which was a drop off really when sanctions hit and Bitcoin couldn't be paid to various individuals, especially those linked to Russia. We did see a lot less activity, and maybe that also is linked to the pivot away from sort of commercial targets to government and sort of structural targets. Do you think that's also the case?
I would agree with that, yes, definitely. From what we're seeing and the reports that we're receiving, all indications are around that side. As we know that with the incidence of wars and stuff, that does a lot of those criminal organisations, their target seems to be particularly directed away from the European side of things and into particular countries which they're engaging with. So.
And it's interesting. I mean, I talked there about it being a business and about payment. I don't know if you've seen, but one of the broadsheets, I'll say, rather than giving the name of the publication, because I don't be doing advertising, had on its front page yesterday a ransomware game that you could go on interactively on the website, and it talks you through a ransomware attack as if you're the CEO, and you get to various decision points. It's pretty realistic, actually. It's very good. But at the end of it, you get a sort of summary as to who's paid ransom and who hasn't paid ransom. And it's about 50-50. You know, that when put at decision points, looking at businesses, some will pay and some won't. You know, any thoughts around sort of the flexibilities there?
Yeah, well, I suppose from the DPC's perspective, we would never specifically advise any company on whether or not to pay it. I think consideration has to be given to the type of data it is, to effects on, say, for instance, highly vulnerable people if the service has been stopped. We do direct people to engage with the An Garda Síochána in the first instance. It's vital to let the police and authorities know, and to let the cyber security centres know, so that they can give direction, assist with the forensic analysis of the systems, but also to see if there's any potentially encryption keys out there already that might be of assistance to getting the systems control back over those systems.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, if we can move on a little bit now, I mean, one of the areas I'd like to look at is where you talk about reporting numbers, some going up, some going down. Are there sort of any specific sectors, public, private, or any industry sectors that you have sort of key sort of increases or decreases in?
Yeah, so in terms of the numbers, the private sector, there's been quite a significant drop in that over the past, in that comparison study we did. Excuse me. There was about, I think, a 40%, just over a 40% decrease in the number of private organisations submitting breach notifications. And in the public sector, it's in and around 10%. So I suppose the decrease in the public sector side of things will coincide with the decrease in postal material issuing, and the incorrect recipients and emails issuing. That seems to the message we've been speaking about, that side of things for the past 4 years, seems to be getting through. So there's quite a change in it. The private sector in particular, they seem to be, I suppose, more aware of their obligations through the large amount of fines, I think, issuing to private companies as well, has probably brought attention to their obligations under the GDPR in relation to technical and organisational measures.
And so do you think, I understand the sort of driver or good focus that in the sort of large fines enforcement actions give, but do you think it is generally a better compliance and security, or are you seeing sort of a better understanding almost of where the thresholds are as to what is notifiable and what isn't?
Yeah, I suppose because we're 4 years into GDPR being now, we do believe that organisations have a much better understanding of their obligations. The DPC in particular has afforded a lot of our resources over the past 4 years to assist companies with becoming compliant. For example, the breach unit, we would have, up to January of this year, we would have issued recommendations in response to the majority of the notifications that we've received. We've seen organisations investing a lot in the training of staff of data protection matters, which may not have been at the forefront of companies' strategies previously, but also implementation those organisational measures and policies to mitigate against any risks. So yeah, no, we definitely have seen we think it's more so that they're aware of their obligations.
So interesting there, a shift from sort of education to, I should say carrot and stick maybe, but the right way of looking at this, where leniency may have been seen in the past as we grew into an understanding and the sort of the entirety of the GDPR compliance landscape. So the Irish DPC has now sort of moved more to enforcement and saying, look, you've had time, you really should be compliant now. Is that reflected in your interactions with other data protection authorities across Europe?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty much, well, first of all, just to mention, because it is quite an interesting read, at the end of last year, the DPC issued a regulatory strategy which will cover the next 5 years. It clearly sets out the ambitious goals that the DPC has and how we're going to do that. But I suppose focusing that we're going to be doing more for more people. That in itself doesn't mean that we won't continue to handle individual complaints, but we'll be looking at incidents, I suppose, for going to inquiry in those big ticket inquiries that we'll be focusing our attention on those type. We've allowed for the bedding period for organisations to become accustomed to the new regulations, but it's time to enforce on that side of things. I think you can see across Europe that seems to be the approach with the number of administrative fines, reprimands issuing has increased quite a lot. So from that side of things, I think across the EU, the different data protection authorities are moving towards a much better understanding of what's required in relation to cooperation, for example. That's evidenced from some of the more recent decisions, in particular I won't name any companies, but in relation to one that the DPC issued recently. So in that case, there was a number of DPAs that raised objections in relation to the decision that issued through an informal process where we discussed those objections with the DPAs. They were subsequently withdrawn. So it just shows that there is a lot more engagement and a lot more understanding of trying to work together to to bring those inquiries and decisions to the end point. Outside of that, through the Article 65 mechanism, it does allow DPAs to voice concerns over aspects of decisions where consensus has not been achieved outside of that formal process. That allows DPAs, I suppose, to achieve a more consistent approach and to have a more consistent interpretation of what remains a relatively new piece of legislation. If we compare the introduction of GDPR with the introduction, for example, of competition regulations, I think we're on the right path. There's also been, I don't know if you're aware of it, from the EDPB side, where an adopted set of criteria to assess cases which may be of strategic importance, which would warrant closer inspection and cooperation between the regulators, has been introduced. So while that's still in its infancy and we're working out nuances in relation to that, a number of those kind of cases have already been proposed and agreed on. So it's quite an interesting space to be in. But there is definitely an increase in the understanding of what cooperation means.
Great. I think obviously, with experience on both sides, whether it's as an organisation or as a regulator, things do get easier and become slightly smoother. It's obviously been slightly sort of choppy start, but I think on both sides, it's difficult to get some of those big decisions out, and I think that obviously there's been comment in the press about that. But as you're saying, it's great that we're now seeing some movement towards sort of greater collaboration and understanding. I know I was very happy to be reading about more clarity on the criteria for assessments. One of the reasons being, I was always found it quite challenging when interacting with some regulators, that they were more focused on the name of the company that I was working with than on the actual incident itself. And it kind of felt at times that actually this could be a good headline winner rather than looking at the substance behind it.
Yeah, and that is one thing that the DPC is focused on. It's of no significance as to who the organisation that has potentially infringed the GDPR. It's about looking at I suppose those processing activities and how they affect individuals. That's the whole purpose of the GDPR, is to regulate and to protect the individual. So it from our perspective, it is the subject matter of it, be it the complaint or an alleged infringement, that we will look at, not as to who the company is. I think that's quite evident through the decisions that have been issued on that are available, published on our website. The categories are highly varied. So there's no discrimination between who is doing what. So, but we're very happy to back up that. But in even saying that, though, the DPC does have I suppose we're over a huge number of companies that affect individuals European-wide. So we do have to take that into consideration when we're doing that assessment.
Yeah, understood. Well, look, if we can move on, we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to just touch on something again that you said at the beginning, which is there's been an increase in paper loss, reports of personal data being lost by way of paper loss. I'm kind of thinking back to last year, and we had a huge decrease because of COVID, because nobody was leaving the house. Is this in some way linked to that?
We believe from our analysis of the notifications that we've received, there definitely is, in relation to the numbers around that, we've seen over nearly 100% increase in the number of notifications. We're attributing it to the fact that people are working in a hybrid sphere, so some days in the office, some days at home. We believe that their printed documents may be when they're in the office and bringing them home and subsequently losing them, or there might be an incident of theft. We've witnessed in a couple of scenarios. So from our perspective, we're trying to get that message across that it's vital that organizations, when they're thinking about the hybrid approach to work, that they put the policies in place in line with their Article 24 requirements, that's across the board with all employees, that's communicated. I suppose thought has to be given to organizational security, document security, but in particular how they're going to ensure that the documents are perhaps destroyed at the end. So they need to ensure that their policies are robust around those side of things. We're engaging with a number of institutions in relation to that, and we're trying to target specific sectors that we're seeing. We engage a lot from the breach side, where the risk may not be very high, but we do want to get a message out. So our consultation unit are still there to engage with the organisation. So we're hoping that by the end of the year we'll see a decrease in that number. But it's quite an interesting statistic to see, which is hopefully going forward it'll decrease.
It is an interesting statistic, but I think a really good reminder as well that when we think of the definition of security breach, how wide it is, and what the contextual security, sort of technical and organizational security measures are for compliance with the GDPR, it's again incredibly broad. If I carry papers home, leave them at home, what do I do with them then? It's not just about saying sort of that interim journey period where they could be stolen. As you quite rightly mentioned, it's about destruction. Now, do I have to have a confidential destruction bag at home, or do I have to have a shredder that I take back, or do I have to bring all documents printed out back to the office to make sure that they're shredded here? It's a very broad pattern that needs to be sort of, I think, very clearly thought through, which often is just sort of missed.
Yes, it is, and I suppose from our perspective, people need to use a bit of common sense as well when they are printing off stuff, and actually think about, do I actually need this in hard copy? You've got access to the systems, and there's robust measures around that access when people are working at home. So I think organisations do need to have the policies in place if we're coming across quite significant breaches. With no policies in place, it is something that we will be looking into, and we've engaged with a number of organisations on this side. We've a couple of inquiries in being at the moment in relation to the retention side of documents, which were printed off and subsequently lost when they were bringing them back to the office to destroy them. So there's quite it's an interesting area, but it's one that I suppose is only coming to the forefront now because of the move to working from home and now back in the office on a hybrid basis. So it's something that we are communicating across all industries.
Well, I'm quite glad you can't see behind my virtual screen here the papers printed in my office, which I'm now thinking, I might have to do something with on the retention basis, but we can leave it there. We've only got a minute left. As ever, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. And I think some really interesting points that have come up, trends that we've seen about where the threats are increasing, where they're decreasing, where they're shifting, which is more, I think, what we see in this area all the time. So, Sandra, just to thank you once again for participating. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I hope to see you again soon.
And same, Rohan, thanks a million for having me again. It's always a pleasure to engage with this forum.
Sandra and Rohan, thank you so much for getting us off to such a great start today. We really, really do appreciate it. It's so great to hear from the DPC at this event.